Thank you, everybody, for taking time out of your summer. Welcome to the Wednesday, July 9th meeting of the Capital Region Transportation Council. We'll start with introduction, Steve Feeney, Schenectady County.
Greg Butcher, Regional One DOT. Chris Wallen, City of Schenectady.
Dave Bonaverde, Albany County Airport Authority.
Mike Butler, City Mechanical.
Jim Lambert, Saratoga County.
Josh Steinman, Port of Albany. Peter Kmith, Town of Rotterdam.
Martin Drew, Saratoga Springs.
Andrew Kreshik, City of Troy.
Mark Castiglio, Regional Planning Commission.
Bill Trudeau, City of Albany.
Lisa Armando, Albany County.
Sharon Butler, City of Cohoes.
Sandy Mislowitz, Transportation Council. Go that way.
Jim DeJoya, Public.
Jesse Vogel, LaBelle.
Andrew Tracy, Transportation Council. Ethan Townsend, Transportation Council.
Adam McCarville, Transportation Council.
Mike Williams, CDTA.
Bob Rice, FCM Engineering.
Greg Mastrand, FCM Engineering.
I was Town County.
Joe Peregrine, Town Colony.
And listening virtually, we have Leah Rye from the Transportation Council, Corey Hopwood from Cambridge Systematics, Eliza Orlando Milbauer. I'm not sure your affiliation, if you wouldn't mind putting that in the chat, please. Emily Laughlin, CDTA, Jamie O'Neill, Town of Malta, Joe Salino, CHA, Laura Robertson, Town of Niskuna, and Michael Baudet from the Thruway Authority, Parker Morris from the Transportation Council, Siobhan Terrell from Cambridge Systematics, Teresa LaSalle from the Transportation Council, Tom Houlihan from the City of Rensselaer, Tony Tazi from the Town of Glenville, and Wayne Bonesteel from I forget the firm. I'm sorry, Wayne. I'm blanking on your firm name. But you Wait, Albert. Thank you.
No, new name.
Azar. Sorry, Azar. Sorry about that.
One removed.
And that's everybody
That's it.
virtually.
No visitor issues, no one's registered.
No one has registered to speak.
On
today.
to, we have a presentation. I introduce that.
Yeah, so we have been speaking to regional stakeholder in the freight industry, Dagan Trucking, who's been sharing some information with us about some of the challenges of moving very large stuff around the capital region. And they're not the only freight hauler that's having challenges. So we wanted to run through a presentation on some of the issues that are arising specific to the wind business. But you know, the issue is beyond that. You know, there's other large goods that get moved through the capital region that are having challenges. So I'm going to turn it over to Ethan to run through our presentation today.
Didn't mean to walk up there.
Okay, we're good.
Thanks, Sandy. So like Sandy was saying, we're talking a bit about overdimensioned freight, specifically moving wind turbine parts from GE Vernova in the city of Schenectady to the Port of Albany. Next slide. So some of you in this room have been involved to varying degrees. Some of you don't know about this at all. So quickly, we'll go over some background of the problem. Next slide. And when we say problem, you know, it's really a benefit to this region that we have these wind turbine parts being produced in our region. GE Vernova is located at the historic GE site in the city of Schenectady, and they're producing wind turbine parts, but also conventional turbine parts of various sizes for various applications. The very largest of which are offshore wind turbines over there on the right. It says Halliday X offshore wind turbine parts. And they produce a couple of different parts here. They don't produce the actual blades for the turbines, but next slide. What they do produce are the nacelles, which are the hubs, the main housing, which is over on the left, and then the gearbox and the drivetrains, which are over on the right. And those are basically just, you know, copper wire wrapped around and around and around each other. So both of these are very large, obviously, but they're not taking up the entirety of those truck beds. The reason they have to be on such large trucks is because of the extreme weight of these products. They need to be dispersed over a bunch of axles. And even then, it's a lot of weight on each axle. The largest of these can weigh over 150 tons, which is 300,000 pounds. So extremely large. And hundreds can be produced each year, but it's very demand dependent. You know, GE is not just producing a ton of these just to sit in warehouses waiting for orders. They're doing some of that to be ready for large orders, but it really depends on them getting big orders from across the world. Right now, they're fulfilling a big order in Australia for onshore wind, for example. So next slide. That brings us to the other end of the equation, which is the Port of Albany, which again is a really big benefit to our region. The Port of Albany has a heavy lift capability that's kind of unique for ports. Those two cranes on the bottom left can lift a massive amount of weight that many ports cannot handle. And so they allow GE to load all of these parts onto boats that can then be shipped all over the world. The port also has the new 85-acre Beacon Island site, which was originally planned to be used for offshore wind part, manufacturing, storage, loading. But due to the federal environment right now, that was put on hold. So the port recently, I think it just closed a request for expressions of interest for some new development at that site. But so the port is a huge benefit to our region, just like GE is. So trying to connect these two big benefits to our region is really important. So next slide. Oh, last slide. Thank you. So if you're trying to get to GE Vernova, from GE Vernova to the Port of Albany, just in a car, just any one of us, it's going to be about 20 miles. It's going to take about 20 minutes. You're going to mostly be on the interstate. You're going to take 890 to 90 to 787, and then you're at the port. And it's really quick, really painless. That is not an option for these over-dimensioned loads for a variety of reasons. And so this map, there's a lot of colors, a lot of lines. We'll break down each of them, but there are several options that these turbines have to get from GE to the port, each of which has its challenges, but also its advantages. But there's a lot of barriers on the way. On the map, they're a little small. There's little orange dots kind of speckled throughout, and those were all an identified problem site by our trucking partner. So we'll go through some of those, what those problems are. So just need to go to the next slide. The first group is physical challenges. These are things like low and narrow bridges, tight corners, the load weights of bridges, things that are just there on the ground. Also includes things like electrical and signal infrastructure, which the trucking partners have the ability to, as the truck is going down, they have a team that goes ahead and they unbolt all of the infrastructure, move it out of the way. The truck drives by, they bolt it back down. Works great if you just need to get something through once, but if you're trying to go through like multiple times a week, it's a really big impediment. The throughway also has dimensional restrictions on varying parts for a number of reasons. And then hardscaped right-of-way infrastructure like Jersey barriers, refuge islands, those are really hard for trucks to navigate. You'll see I've emphasized hardscaped roundabouts there, like the one that is on the right. That's because when we spoke to Dagan Trucking, we asked if there was one or two things that you could really highlight as like the biggest barriers to you currently, what would they be? And they said hardscaped roundabouts. They said that in Europe, they have styles of roundabouts that have like bollards that can drop down to the ground, the truck can drive right through them, and then they raise back up to become a roundabout again. We don't really have those in this country, really, let alone in our region. But hardscape roundabouts pose a significant barrier, even ones that have a truck apron, like the one seen there, that a typical truck can kind of pop up on to make the turn. When we're talking about such extreme weights, it's very common for these trucks to blow out tires if there's any sort of change in the distribution of weight. So they'll hop up on there and blow a tire, and then they'll have to change it, and they'll drive a couple more feet and blow another tire after replace it, and do that until they clear the roundabout. Next slide. The other group of challenges are more logistical. It's very common for municipalities to not love having trucks go through their regions. Trucks are large, they're noisy, they get in the way, and all the problems that people associate with trucks are exacerbated by these super dimensioned loads. So people don't love having them come through their areas. There's also local requirements like time restrictions. It's not uncommon for municipalities that you can't come through between 9 and 5, or you can only come through between 9 p.m. and midnight. And those often don't line up, so you can get to the border of one municipality, then have to wait 4 or 5 hours until you can go through that one, and kind of do that until you make your way down the route. Bridge downgrades are also extremely common. Like we spoke about in physical challenges, bridges have a certain weight they are permitted to carry. And in a region like ours that has lots of bridges and lots of aging bridges, we just got through the TIP process, and a huge amount of money went towards just bridge replacement and repair. as these bridges age, they have lower weight requirements that they can handle. And so even if you have one route that's working for a year or two, after a couple of years of these super loads going over them, the bridge may be downgraded and the truck can no longer cross that bridge. The other emphasized item on this list is the escort requirements. This is what Dagan Trucking also identified as a large barrier in New York State. For pretty much any super dimension load, it requires between 3 to 5 police officers to be escorting the vehicle at all times. This compares to most other states, which require 1 or 2. The New York State Police also, if you get between their subdivision boundaries, they have to change which group of police officers are doing the escort. The police officers only have a certain amount of hours they're allowed to do the escort. So there's a lot of function turnover, and it costs tens of thousands of dollars for the trucking companies to have these police escorts. So on the next slide, we will have a little video before we play. You can see following the truck, there are 3 vehicles. 2 of those are just the regular, blocker car. They have the signs that say over dimension. Then that 3rd vehicle is a police vehicle. So Sandy, if you could play the video. You can see that ahead in the striped median, there's another police car that is pulling up. There's another police car just ahead of that one blocking traffic. You can just barely through the trees now see another police car poking out as it's going to the right. So that's 4 police cars escorting this truck through this, fairly wide road, making a fairly easy turn. There is some traffic. The video isn't actually this bad. It's just the loading right now. But you can see that the police car is waiting there for the truck to pull up, invisible truck. And then the police car makes its turn, passes to go block off the next intersection. There are obviously benefits to having these police escorts. It makes it so they can guide traffic easier. If there's any problem, then the police are there to respond to it. But the trucking companies would say that compared to other states that have 1 or 2 police officers for the whole route, and that's sufficient. So it's really context dependent. But 3 to 5, many people would say is excessive for these, especially when a lot of them aren't going through urban areas for other reasons. Next slide. Oh, just play it again.
That's weird.
There we go. So now we'll go through a couple of the route options. These are the routes that were kind of being used or discussed at the time that this problem was brought to us. Now that it's been several months, we have a new set of routes that are currently being used and explored. So we'll go through these, and then at the end, I'll kind of give a little sneak peek of what we're working on now. So the first of the routes is Route 5 to Washington Ave to Lark Street. This is the most direct option that was being explored. You can see it follows the interstates pretty closely. Has some problems. So it goes through a lot of urban areas. It begins GE Schenectady, gets on 890 until it can get on State Route 5, drive down to the village of Colony, where it turns onto New Parner Road, then turns onto Washington Ave Extension, turns into Washington Ave. Then in downtown Albany, they turn on to Lark Street, which if any of you are familiar with Lark Street, imagine a giant wind turbine going down there. You have to move a lot of infrastructure like we were talking about, and it's really busy at all times. So then from Lark Street, they go on Delaware Ave, where they can then cross 787 and get to the port. So pretty direct, but goes through a lot of urban areas. Central Ave is always busy, Route 5 always busy. Goes right by Albany, goes right through downtown Albany. These are areas that have lots of pedestrian traffic, lots of vehicle traffic, lots of residential areas mixed in. So really not a great option for these trucks to go. Next slide. The next option, you may be saying that yellow or that blue line doesn't actually go to the Port of Albany, and you would be correct. So this route mimics the last route as it goes down Route 5, but instead of turning south down New Parner Road, turns north, goes around the airport up to Route 7, which then takes over to US Route 9 and up to the Mohawk River on the other side of river. There's not a port there is the main problem. Well, one of the problems, there's a couple problems. There are specialized low ride boats that when the wind turbines get onto them can lower themselves in the water. So they're only an inch or 2 above the water. Extremely close, extremely precise machines. Even with that technology, there are a couple of bridges at the lock and at Peebles Island that are too low to the water for these largest wind turbines to make under. And it's like, gee, can you make your turbines just like a tiny bit smaller so they can get under? But maximizing the size of these turbines is how they maximize their profits and their energy output. So it doesn't make sense to shrink the size of the turbines. And Another con is obviously that it requires you to move to the water, not at a port. Originally, I was thinking they had brought a crane with them and then lifted the turbine off of the truck onto the boat. Turns out what they actually do is just drive the truck onto a boat, which is very challenging, you know, very precise. You don't want the truck going into the water as you're driving it on, especially since it's not at a port. So it's not a great option. It was being explored, but really does not work all that well. Next slide. So then we get to the Catskills route. So you can see here, this is just a mess of green. This is just our general over dimension routes through the region. The route that was being used the most frequently because it has the least amount of conflicts and uses the largest amount of highways. The trucks begin at GE, yep, right up there. And then they get on Route 7 to go west down to I-88. And then they, yep, so just keep going west there. Then they go off of this map, take a big long route out the Catskills, and then come back up Route 32, which is kind of in the center, and then, yep, right back up to the Port of Albany. This is great because it's a lot less urban of an environment. There's a lot less physical barriers, but you also have a lot of small rural highways and intersections. So there's not a lot of room for these trucks to be passed by vehicles. Not a lot of room for turns sometimes. The infrastructure out there isn't designed to support as much weight. So there are places where, you know, these trucks driving just on the street have burst water pipes. There are areas where they have destroyed people's yards and had to replace them because the area isn't designed for these large trucks. This route also takes over 3 days and it's 100-mile route. So, you know, you're re-driving 100 miles, not going to take us 3 days. But with these trucks, like we were talking about, they move really slowly. They have to make turns really tight, but they also have those local time requirements where they get from one edge of a municipality to another and have to stop and wait until it can move through the next one. So again, this is a route that would work if you had to do it once. But if you're having to do it, you know, even once a month, let alone a couple times a week, it does not work very well. And that whole time you're being escorted by state police, which is just racking up a larger and larger bill for these trucking companies. So next slide. The ideal route, according to our trucking partners, is the route that you or I would take to get from GE to the port. They would just get on 890, drive down to 90, get on 787, and boom, you're at your port. Doesn't work so well. It's very direct, no residential or commercial infrastructure because it's all on the highway. But aging bridges on 890 are regularly being downgraded, so they can't support these super loads. There are dimensional restrictions on the thruway, specifically the section of I-90 that is west of the Northway. Because that's where toll booths used to be. There's no booths there, but there's still restrictions for a variety of reasons. And then also the ongoing redesign of 787. It may or may not be an interstate in the future. You know, an interstate is great for large trucks. But even if this route were to work really well, 787 could be redesigned to a place where it was less ideal for trucks. So next slide. Those are our current options. So now I'll just real quickly go through the next steps of this project here at the Transportation Council. The first is obviously to find a new route. At the time of making this slide, we were awaiting descriptions of these trouble spots from our trucking partner. We've started to meet with them to identify those issue spots that we can then analyze to see how they can be changed. We can then draw a new route, or really routes, because like we talked about in logistic challenge, you can have a perfect route, but if a work zone comes up, if a bridge gets downgraded, things are going to change. So it's ideal to have a couple of options. Even if you have one that's ideal, and a couple that are, you know, okay. So try and draw a new route that passes through the fewest and easiest to address of these trouble spots. You know, we're not raising a low rail bridge as a part of this project because that would be crazy. We're gonna see what we can do to move a utility pole back a couple feet, buy a bit of someone's property and move their fence back so we're not destroying their yard. Really simple stuff like that we can ideally bundle up into one capital project and then work with those public and private owners to address the trouble spots to create a new route. Next slide. We can also explore some policy changes to ease the burden of moving these loads around. So working with state police to revise escort requirements, exploring super dimension restrictions with the throughway for possible permits or exceptions, because there are some permits and exceptions, but they don't apply to all of these loads that are being moved. We can also work to incorporate over dimension considerations into local planning and project requirements, just so that we're keeping in mind these really beneficial economic drivers in our region and not, kind of pricing people out because we're making it so difficult for them to move around. So next slide. We have an upcoming meeting. Some of you here are going to be involved in it. It's going to be next week, and we're trying to bring together as many stakeholders as possible. Really to bring this back to people's attention. It was getting a lot of attention when it first came up last year, but it's kind of been on the back burner here and other places for a variety of reasons, but it's still a problem. It's not going away unless we address it. If it does go away, it's because GE has moved on, which would be a big problem for us. So getting people together to brainstorm solutions and potentially creating a small task force of, just a handful of people who can meet semi-regularly to kind of pick up some of these trouble spots and make sure everyone's staying fresh and involved with the project. So that is all from me. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to talk to you at the end. You can always send me an email or call. I'm happy to talk to you about it. That is all from me. Thank you very much.
Is there some reason we wouldn't look at? I know you're looking at the cheap options to, but if there was a great route and, we really need to fix this bridge or raise it, I mean. Wouldn't we also wanna look at that as long term, like, geez, if we just did this, that.
I think that's what we're
change this
trying. to-
Policy or that.
Right, like, can we identify a couple of routes to prioritize for these sorts of investments? So when the state or other bridge owner has to downgrade the bridge, we say, okay, because of this, we need to make sure that we're getting resources to fix that problem. Rather than waiting, and it really does tie into regional planning here and kind of like the whole purpose of the MPO. Which is to solve these sorts of problems, and as Ethan said, our fear from what we're hearing is GE may leave. If they can't figure this out, it is too expensive in New York to build these things here. The way things are right now, so we need to do our part as best we can to kind of come up with some local solutions to this. Working with state partners, working with our local government partners, there's probably a range of options. But we just want to make sure we give enough options so that there's a couple of routes so that, yes, if there's construction on something, there's another alternative that makes sense.
Have we heard from GE or is this just
They're-
a trucking company?
No,
We've definitely heard from GE. Yeah, oh yeah, they've been here a couple of times and they've kind of reiterated this, so.
And we're hoping that there's the National Highway Freight Program, which requires the statewide plan that we all put input into. We're hoping this effort can input to the next phase of that plan, because it gets updated every 2 or 3 years. And if we find like a bridge, these loads are so heavy, even our standard design bridges may not be sufficient. And so we may apply to, as part of a bridge budget, upgrade the structural capacity to handle these for the long term.
That's for now, we're dealing with components that are onshore wind,
Yeah.
now have a nice pause where we could really look at this before we start to really get into offshore wind. Which is much grander,
Which
heavier.
they're even taller, wider and heavier. And the bridge you guys built on site.
Yes, it's 6,000 pounds per square inch, we got something on that.
Yeah,
Mhm.
we don't,
It's one of the heaviest capacity bridges in the East Coast that we're.
Yeah.
For its span.
so we generally don't build ones like that.
Yeah.
Maybe somewhere we will need to. Fortunately, everyone's on the right side of the river, so we don't have major crossings to cross, because game over, you had to cross the Mohawk or Hudson.
Yeah, well, that was.
Years
intent.
ago, we did the rail, we lowered the rail, 20 years ago. To bring loads out of GE to the port.
Right.
Um,
And now these exceed that.
and we've exceeded that, and that's the bridge clearances of the rail bridges, I would assume.
Yeah, as far as like freight rail taking it. in.
Freight rail
Yeah,
taking it in,
These exceed the capacity of what the rail cars can actually bring in now, so it's only trucking options and then. Limited by the routes.
Ethan, your ideal route
Mhm.
from the Broadway exit of 890 all the way to the port.
Mhm.
I drive that. Are you going over any bridges on that route?
Yeah. You can go on that.
I'm trying to think of where.
787, 90,
Most of 787s.
most of 787 is elevated.
787, when you come off exit 23, And you're
They're
going
not coming that
down.
way.
They can't come that
They
way.
can't come that way. Throughway has a restriction. The gantry's in the way. So the toll gantry, these are taller than the toll gantry.
The ones that would read your plates.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right off the end of 23, yep.
and then, so throughway is not an option. So we're.
No,
we're
what I'm
bringing
getting at
them
though is
down
no-
in.
Throw out the pole gantry. Right?
Throughway would be an option then, I mean.
But I was saying,
That
I
would be
mean,
the
just,
simplest way.
And that was the first thing that I said to well, two of the companies that I dealt with.
I mean, I just couldn't imagine that if we're trying to talk about economic impact of losing something like GE, and I know it might be a Schenectady Homer, that we're gonna be like the crane gantry that we put in, the two of them at exit 23 are. I'm just talking about physically, if you drive it from 890 Broadway, now the viaduct is a mess. That thing should be destroyed and replaced in its entirety, so let's not talk about the viaduct. But from Broadway, 890 to 90 to
The throughway is a
70,
straight shot.
you're not going over bridges. If everything's going over you.
So you raise everything else. That was the first thing I mentioned to two of the trucking companies is why can't we get on, when I'm trying to throughway? And then we'll deal with the local roads, cause it's still a direct shot-ish. There's a railroad to deal with, but, down by the port,
But there's still other,
there's other things.
Yeah,
like
we,
even at exit 24 to get
Mhm.
off the throughway and onto freebie 90. I don't think there's
20
any way we'll get to 19 feet.
23 would be the place to go, but I think we still have bridge to clear.
I think there's several bridges.
Yeah, you gotta
Clear
clear.
in Albany, Crum Hill, New Scotland that go over the throughway that are too low. So yeah, they may not be weight
23 feet.
bearing, but they're not high enough to accommodate the.
In the future, they're gonna need 19
Yeah,
feet.
in the future, it's gonna be even taller than what the current issue is. I
They're
don't
gonna be
know
at
the
19.
specific- Sorry, 19, yeah.
Yeah, they're getting up to 19 in the future. and,
Yeah.
You know, we're not even built out to 16 feet over the interstate yet, which.
Well, I mean, and I know you showed traffic signals and stuff like that. None of us, 19 is the max height in the manual anyway for a traffic signal. By federal rule.
Yeah, so this is gonna be an interesting meeting next week to
Yeah.
begin this discussion. If there's like two things to solve on an ideal route, we can probably come together and lay a plan.
Mhm.
If there's 50, I
Mhm.
don't know what to tell you, that's what the next week's meeting is gonna be
That'd
for.
be a good meeting.
So what are the barriers again on the water route?
So there's a historic bridge
The People's Island
at
Bridge,
People's Island that,
Oh, yeah.
as we understand it, you cannot. That would be the very difficult one to address because it's historic.
Tear it down.
it's only the access to Shippo.
But to be honest, I mean, we haven't ruled anything out at this point, so Waterloo has been discussed in the past, but it could have this.
There's issues
there's
seasonally.
Seasonal, the canal's not open year round, these are gonna,
Yeah.
this current order, I think, goes through, they
Yeah.
just started it, right?
Up until the port, it's year round, so anything passes when we run into problems.
Yeah.
The Coast Guard doesn't go past like the Livingston Bridge or whatever.
Right.
So.
So,
Coming up, I mean, I see them almost, I don't wanna say daily, but on 890. And on my
Mhm.
drive to work, they're coming up 890, where are they going? They're.
Right.
They're coming up the hill on 890, just past Broadway, are they getting on 7? So what
So
are,
it depends. So a lot of them are going to the port, but a lot are also going, just like driving out to Wyoming. So some of them are going to the port, some of them are flipping around and going.
the video that,
Out to 88.
We're getting
The video
six
that-
or eight of them a week.
About, yeah.
Yeah, 6 to 8 a week right now.
I'm seeing regular, coming
Yeah.
up 890, just that short section, I don't know where they're going.
yeah, so
But I
that
see
video
them coming
that,
up the hill from Broadway,
Mhm.
the
And
video
then
that
they're
even
taking
showed
and
was
then they're
with
taking the empty
the
trailer straight back to
798.
reload it.
The
Yeah,
what?
They're
I-88.
taking the
going
empty
88.
trailer as is,
Oh.
not unloading it and driving it back empty, just so to save time,
The process moves.
to keep the process moving along. That way they're not having to disassemble and reassemble the trailer. So the empty trailer, which is not light either, has to go back, get reloaded and the adventure starts again.
It's also,
And it's two companies right now that's moving it. It's two.
And Vernova does not have any port access at their facility.
No, I know there's been past discussions about
They-
opening an option up for water, but
so there were some mega loads that they did. Close 890 at night, take out the median rail, take things out of the way, go forwards and backwards in a Z type shape to then get down to the canal lock to load directly on a canal barge, but again, that clearly made the height
Back then.
back then
Yeah.
it worked, but these things are getting even bigger, so that can't even work. So they did explore a crossing over or under 890. We were actually entertained giving up a ramp that is underutilized, but they would have to excavate so far down, they'd be below the water table to get under. And then they explored the idea of a bridge over 890, but a bridge that can carry 150 tons or more. And then the beams on the bridge to get over 890, the elevation you'd have to climb and then get back down to the river, that just became infeasible. And again, the bridge is still in the way on the river, so that doesn't, still doesn't work.
We're doing an acrobatic, they're doing an acrobatic
Provide
on
for.
the Albany end when they get off 787.
Change the
Yeah.
manufacturing process.
Needs all those officers
Does it have
to
to be
make it
manufactured
happen.
for Nova, or can it be component driven, shipped to the port, assembled final, and then you just put it in the water from there?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the, I don't know about GE, but like one of the intentions for what we did with Beacon was to get the manufacturing right there. So that way it was adjacent to the river and didn't have to go on the highway
Right.
or the train.
It
So,
just seems the costs
Yeah.
of transport would be offset by the location change,
mhm,
dependent upon, the
Yeah,
cost, the capital cost of changing the manufacturing process.
Right.
That will be.
Are
Yeah,
these
we
too
wanna
heavy to
just-
go on rail? They used to go on rail.
They're too,
Not at the weight,
too big.
they're too wide.
Too wide now.
yeah. But the other issue, we're focusing on the wind because these are the largest goods, but there are other large goods. If you've noticed. The subway cars, when they come down from Plattsburgh, they're using all kinds of routes to get through our region for the exact same reason. They're not as heavy as the wind turbines are.
Yeah.
But the dimensions are such that that's why you see them on Route 20. You don't see them on some of these other routes. So I just don't wanna, we're using this is sort of the high end of the issue, but there are other goods being shipped through our region for which. There's examples from other regions where they call them super load corridors, which are designed to kind of, again, be those routes where they can carry these oversized goods. In a more efficient way, and we don't have anything like that here yet in the capital region, but I think that's what we're looking to explore.
Hey Sandy, this is Joe Semino. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, go ahead.
Just a question if I may. The meeting next week and the planning that you're doing in the near future, is that GE specific driven, or is that, because you're talking about different loads and different future uses, is that more encompassing of the whole region beyond the GE, turbines that they're looking to move? So I thought the GE project had kind of an end date of, and I may have just heard this, rumor or wrong, but it was like an 18-month, enterprise, or any 18-month exercise, I should say. And then it was over. Is that not the case, Ethan? Is this more longer term than 18 months? Because I'm thinking of all the planning and infrastructure improvements for that effort. By the time we do all that, right, the whole thing could be for naught. But we're just planning for that and the future. Is that what this is next week?
The current order, I think, is 300 units onshore to Australia, and then there's another order coming, I believe, to Southeast Asia somewhere. That's the 18-month scenario, and
Yeah.
then we don't know the future of offshore wind. If
Right.
offshore comes back in a real way, they want to be at the forefront of it. And then what do we do?
So this is for an immediate, and then potential future. We want to be set up for
Mhm.
future as well.
Yeah, but as I said, we're using these wind turbines as one example of a good. There are other goods being shipped through the region that are over dimension that are having other issues as well.
So
Great.
we're kind of, with the volume of shipments that GE is doing, we're kind of focusing on that corridor first, but this conversation is gonna continue about, making sure all super loads can get through our area in perpetuity.
Gotcha. Great. Thank you.
Sure.
Well, can we all agree at least that we need more police?
More escalating.
No.
Oh, man.
Try to get one
Now, is
thing
that a
settled.
law or a policy?
It's state law.
All right, we moving along.
We can move on. Thank you.
Administration, previous meeting minutes. I get a motion.
I'll make a motion.
We have a second. Second. Any further discussion? All those in favor, aye? Anyone opposed, abstained, motion carries, thank you.
I'm sorry, who made the initial motion? I should have been Kim and Chair. Thank you. I'm sorry. Stop. It's okay.
All right, UPWP amendment, Sandy.
Yes, this will be quick. We. At the close of our fiscal year from last year, we. Had to rebalance some of our planning funds in our work plan for this year. So we had to do this for both Federal Highway and Federal Transit Administration fund sources. We estimated a backlog, which was basically that's code for unused funds from the prior year that would roll into the new year. We overestimated it, so we had to adjust our budget to reflect that. And to balance out our books, we had to change some task budgets for consultant expenses. For the household travel survey and the infrastructure resilience plan, which we spread over 2 years, so you'll see more of a budget in next year for those. We also reduced task budgets for consultant expenses that were not accounted for in February and March. And then we added in a task related to our travel demand model and needing some technical support on that. So we reserved 60 grand for that. So these are largely budgetary, some administrative and a little tweak to the overall work plan. And we'll just need your approval for these changes.
This is a recommendation to the policy board.
Correct.
Okay. Can I get a motion? Sandy's request.
I'll make one.
Okay,
Mike Butler.
Mike. Second,
Second is Chris.
any further discussion? Those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Abstain? Motion carries, thank you.
Thank you.
Action items, amendment 1. We have Columbia Street. Is that what's going
Columbia
on?
Street, Sharon, would you just like to introduce your amendment?
Sure.
Unless you have a consultant.
I don't think he's here.
Okay.
I didn't see Tony. No,
You need some help, we can help you.
Yeah. 'cause I've never done this.
It's a,
Andy, you wanna help her out?
it's a cost change on this project, right?
Yes, this is a TAP project, City of Cohoes, Columbia Street. The bids came in high. The project was also receiving a small amount of CRP funding already. So we reached out to DOT and said, can we cover the cost increase with additional CRP funding? And the capital program folks said yes. So we're looking to add, I think it was 880 some thousand in CRP funding split between the construction phase and the construction inspection phase. So that they can get construction obligated this year.
Okay, because the TAP is that's a
That's
Cap, that's a cap
so
thing.
we're not supposed to add more TAP. That was a discretionary award.
And the CRP is what we
That's
have
bring
a-
into that pot.
Right, we wanna use that up as quickly as possible because that's a fund source on the brink.
Any comments on the bids or anything? It was just one of those things.
It's a $1 million project.
Yeah.
Like construction's around 6.
Yeah, around 6 now. You know, this kind of helps actually obligate the CRP funds as quickly as possible. And once obligated, it's safe, so.
Yep.
I mean, this doesn't go on to policies, it's just our decision.
This one.
This was between the 500,000 and 3 million, so it's planning committee only.
Okay.
And the CRP was already there, so it's not getting any new funding sources either.
Okay. Can I get a motion to approve Cohos's amendment of the new cost increase?
Motion.
That Andrew?
Second.
Second.
And Mark.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Anyone abstain? Motion carries. Thank you. Roadway departure?
Yeah, I guess I could start and Greg and DOT folks would want to jump in, so. NISDOT in the main office, created a roadway departure safety action plan. And in order to help implement that plan, they set aside some of the highway safety improvement program funds at the state level, and have designated those funds, allocated by county, based on the crash histories related to roadway departures, to implement some of the ideas in the plan. So our region, our 4 counties, had an allocation. Albany County had the most with a little over 1.5 million. Rensselaer, Saratoga, and Schenectady were pretty close together, 7, 8, 9 million, $100,000 range. The state issued a call for projects, about a month ago, maybe 2 months ago now. Admittedly, it's a challenging program to access because the Highway Safety Improvement Program is a very data heavy program and has a lot of requirements on it with analyses and after studies and all sorts of things. So it was not, let's just say it was a challenging program to apply for the dollar values available for local government. So we do appreciate that some folks did take the opportunity, and we got 2 applications, one from the town of East Greenbush in Rensselaer County and the other from Saratoga County. And both of those applications, Rensselaer's was a little, East Greenbush's, I should say, was a little over the allocation, but given we didn't have any other applications, we have the funding in our region to cover both of these. So today we're just asking you folks to approve these projects, to recommend them for funding at the state level. What's gonna happen is we'll be sending through Region 1 these up to the state level for incorporation into the statewide plan or program of projects. And we don't anticipate there to be any issues. These have met the basic eligibility. There's probably going to be details to be worked out with the sponsor at the time that things are actually going into design, but we feel that these are worthwhile projects to fund. So that's the short version. I don't know if Greg had anything else to add.
No, we appreciate folks that did put these together. There was a lot of requirements that, we all took time and effort to assemble. I think there's as you see here, there's an under subscription to the total available pot, so we're gonna see how in the future to try to get additional participation, but stay tuned on the current time frame. And I mean, at first slice, it's very likely every request will get funded, but we need to work through the main office process and get this completely settled and going.
So planning committee's role is just to recommend the 2 projects to
the state for future incorporation in the TIP.
Do you know how many locations East Greenbush identified?
What are the projects?
So they are systemic in nature. So off the top of my head, it's multiple location. I can't tell you the exact number of spots. I want to say the East Greenbush one was 5 to 10 locations maybe. And I think the Saratoga County one was a little more than that, if I recall correctly. Yeah. But it's, I think one of the challenges with the approach taken here was the allocation of funding for the amount of work you have to do to access the federal funds for these very specific, right down to like a guide rail and that kind of thing. Just wasn't worth the time. And I can tell you, we actually did better in terms of proposals versus allocated funds here in the capital region than most of the rest of the state did, listening to my MPO colleagues. The entire city of New York got 2 applications. And that's it. By city of New York, I mean the NIMTIC region, which includes Long Island and includes some of the other counties. So they got 2 applications at NIMTIC.
Well, they're both on Long Island.
And they're both on Long Island.
So just because Schenectady County didn't put anything in, I'm just curious. So the $1.5 million in Rensselaer, it's systematic, so it's signage, guide rails, or do they sneak a roundabout into this thing?
Oh, no. No, it's very specific in terms of the.
So
It's roadway,
I
it's,
snuck west. all
it's
right?
it's roadway
Sneak.
departures.
Right.
It's not, yeah, it's.
Well, I
not-
was getting at, the with a roadway departure, I'm thinking of, I don't know where Fred is, Fred, you know, I'm thinking of, you know, right by me, Van Borst and, Charlton.
Yeah.
We've had, you know, 2 fatalities in Schenectady County in the last 10 years, roadway departure off the road, right? But the recommendation that when you looked at it, there was like a roundabout or something that was.
Yeah, no, that's.
$1.5 million, a hell of a lot of guide rail.
That's not an eligible activity.
There's a lot of work.
Yeah.
We actually.
So that's what
That's
that
not an eligible.
$1.5 million for guide rail and signage
Signage, striping,
in the town of East Creepers, huh?
potentially, I forget what exactly was in each one, but. There's a list of systemic treatments, so fortunately, we don't need to do the benefit cost ratio for these. And it's systemic stuff, like you can even do milled in shoulder shards for short. Center line, the cards, the center line myards too, because all of those things are, even crossovers are considered roadway departures, you're departing the lane. So they're all and we're going for more of these systemic treatments to make the safety funds easier to spend by locals. As we recognize 2/3 of the lane miles are not owned by DOT, we should help on the rest of the system. This is one way.
Yep.
So.
Be interesting to know if it was focused on 4 and 9 and 20 primarily.
No,
It was
Well, could it-
local,
local.
it was
roads.
local
road,
roads.
local.
I should have just said
That's
that.
what I was getting at.
These are specific to local roads,
Right.
not state roads.
Well, that's what I was getting at, is it's a lot of money for a lot of money.
Right, we have our own safety action plan muddling along to do the same thing on our roads.
Are rumble strips expensive? Are they just like the rumble strips and?
They're not, I mean, nothing super expensive, but if you throw every tool in the toolbox, you can start adding up some pretty good money.
Yeah, and you folks know who work in local government better than I, when you use federal money to do that kind of work, the cost is usually probably double that what you can pay locally to do the same work, right? So that's the deterrent to this approach, but it was, you know, a worthwhile effort, and we'll see what comes of it.
Yeah, I think it might just be beneficial to know at some point, like what. You
What
know,
actually
what they
happened.
actually applied for and what, you know, what. You
I
know,
would
what,
just think that,
what, you know,
Schenectady County, Albany County would wanna see, you know, what was awarded.
and
Yeah, we can summarize in more detail the actual details of each application, and because of the requirements, they're gonna require a before and after study of this, so 3 or 4 years down the road, we can always come back and say, hey, here's what actually
and part of the money has to fund the study. Is that some of the cost or no?
No. This is,
So
this is
that-
the implementation.
So who funds the study?
They're,
The before-
the guy in North study, the
What are you
design.
saying? Were you saying that the before and after study?
It's-
Well, the metrics
Yeah,
that.
but
who's gonna go out and do
Who's
that?
gonna go out and do
The
study?
sponsors are required to do it
On their own.
on their own.
Which is hopefully somewhat
Easy.
easier with clear and you just easily
Okay, it's just an accident rate type thing.
check out, hopefully there's a reduction in crashes.
Yeah,
in the corridors
I
they fixed.
It shouldn't be require a $70,000 consultant study to just say, what's the before and after crashes, history, and did we see improvement? That's
How long after do you have to monitor?
I mean, our preference here is we don't look less than 3 years, because the first year and the first year, everybody's getting used to it. You gotta see over a period of time if there's been any change in the trend.
So you implement the elements under this,
Mhm.
then you wait 3 years.
That's again, one of the challenges.
Then if
with
anybody
completely
remembers it.
That's what I say, nobody's gonna
Right.
remember it, and then you just move on with life and you go to something else.
Okay.
All right, so we do need a motion, right? To
You do need a
recommend,
vote, yes.
recommend these 2 projects to the state.
Yes,
Can I get a motion to that effect, please?
Kim, I'm sorry, Lisa.
Do I have a sec?
And
Andrew,
Andrew.
any further discussion? Motion, all those in favor? Aye, please, aye. Anyone opposed, abstain? Motion carries, thank you. Discussion items. Presentation on the draft capital region vision 0.
Yeah, so
Thank you.
Corey Hopwood has been patiently waiting to share with us the recommendations on the Capital Region Vision 0 plan. We went over some implementation concepts at our last meeting. But this will focus more on sort of, I'll call it the strategies and the actions. So Corey, you are able to share your screen if you wanna.
Awesome. Can you hear me all right, Sandy?
We can, yes.
Awesome. And then let me know if this properly goes to full screen after I do this. Is that showing full screen for you all?
No, we're not seeing you at all, but, oh, you know why? Because I'm still sharing here. Hold on. That's fine. Try again.
Any luck there?
Yeah.
Let me stop it and go back in. Share slides.
There it goes. Now it's sharing.
That work?
Yep, you got it now.
Perfect. All right, so we will keep this relatively short, but at least want to give you an understanding for those of you that maybe haven't heard a lot about the Vision Zero Safety Action Plan that we've been working on. The point of the plan for the region is to really come up with some great strategies, solutions for improving safety, getting us closer to zero for fatalities and serious injuries on the roadways. We've made use of a lot of robust outreach in the region, equitable outreach, working with a community advisory council that had representatives from throughout the region. We've had liaisons from throughout the region to help us get that community feedback as well. But there's also been a very detailed data analysis completed. I think some of you have seen that throughout the process. It included a network screening that pulled out some priority locations and some of the concepts that have been shared with some of the various municipalities at very site-specific locations, ones that reactively needed attention sooner rather than later. And then we also had a proactive network screening to say systemically, where do we need to implement things like guardrail, things like edgeline rumble to address roadway departure issues and those types of things that you were just talking about with the state call for projects, those types of more systemic implementation. And I'm not going to get too far in the weeds of that analysis or those site-specific projects today. You are going to see some results in the coming weeks available via the plan on those more site-specific recommendations and some of those priority locations. But today I'm going to talk more generally about the strategies that are included as part of the body of the plan and things that are more regional and can be done network-wide instead of just at site-specific locations. And just to give some background on who's involved in this, the partner jurisdictions are listed there that were included. Each of those received concept development, road safety audit locations. We're still working through wrapping up quite a few of those, but there should be some physical concepts coming out of those soon to be shared with everyone. Also wanted to mention that this project is being completed under the Safe Streets and Roads for All safety program and safety planning grants. And to be eligible for implementation grants, we made sure the plan was placed on the website very much in draft form for the update recently. I think it was 2 weeks ago. They needed to be up to be for the regions to be and the partner jurisdictions to be eligible to apply for implementation grants. And the point of putting a plan like this together, while it is to eliminate fatalities and serious injuries and come up with some of the strategies I'm going to share, it was also to make sure that the partner agencies had the ability to go after the funds to implement those various site-specific treatments that they're going after with the implementation grants. So far, we're on pace to make sure all of that is possible. We are making some tweaks to the plan and wrapping that up with some final things like the concepts that still need to be added to it. Just a quick update on the public engagement. I mentioned it was a very robust outreach effort. First round, we talked a lot about the analysis piece. Second round, talked about some of the key aspects we wanted to address. Definitely helped us come up with some of the proposed strategies and actions I'm going to share here. But then also, we moved into this final round of public outreach where we talked more about the safety improvement program. And those are the types of themes and strategies I'm going to share with you today. We're not going to get too far in the weeds, but you can see some of the more global concepts we're going to try and take on as part of this plan. And when the plan is posted for that public comment, you can actually go in and see what those individual actions will be. Similarly, with that safety improvement program, we're including a lot of policy and process changes or improvements that can be made to how we address potential safety improvements in managing the road system. Here's just some quick highlights on the numbers and figures for that outreach. Great feedback. And then jumping into kind of our key themes and strategies. Again, I'll try and keep this relatively short and leave a little bit of time for any questions related to these. There's a lot of really good stuff that came out of this. And again, this is a result of all the analysis that was completed, the trends that we are seeing, a review of what's working policy-wise, process-wise in the region currently, and then also that robust outreach effort to hear what people were seeing as real safety concerns and what changes might need to be made. So in order to be, I would say, consistent with the state priorities and make ourselves, as eligible as possible for safety improvements going forward and aligning ourselves with the safe system approach, we used all of the emphasis areas from the Strategic Highway Safety Plan at the state level to try and break up, generally where we thought the themes for our improvement should be. So you can see here that within each of those emphasis areas, we have the alignment it has with the safe system approach. That's the federal paradigm shift that we definitely want to fall into to be eligible for federal funding. And some of the implementation grants. We have the New York emphasis areas that we definitely want to stay in line with. One, because we know that they're where we have a lot of our fatal and serious injury contributors. So it makes sense to stay aligned with those, but also to stay eligible for potential state funding, things like the roadway departure safety action plan and the efforts through that. We want to stay close to those as we know those are major contributors to our fatal and serious injury crash problem as well. You can see the themes listed down the side. I'm going to go into these in a little bit more detail. But you can see how they're broken up to almost go into different programmatic and safety improvement areas that we can address. We have intersections, roadway departure, complete streets, speed management, safe road users, which is really touching on road user behavior. So some of those behaviors that may make us more likely to lead to a fatal or serious injury crash outcome. Think of impaired driving, distracted driving. We also lumped our older and younger driver categories from the emphasis areas into that theme as well, and trying to address through education and other means strategies to work with those groups and support those groups. And then similarly, at the bottom there, you can see we have post-crash care. That's addressing our EMS response, our data related to analyzing crashes once they occur, and basically that step of when a crash does occur, how do we get care to someone quickly enough and get them access to care quick enough that it doesn't result in a fatal or serious outcome. Again, important to highlight that across these, about 97% of fatal and serious injury crashes are captured for the region. So that's really covering the majority of the problem and nearly all of it. As a requirement of the Safe Streets and Roads for All program, and putting these types of plans together, there has to be that high level buy-in. So we listed that as leadership and coordination here. Really, that's making sure that we're all on the same page for one, the types of strategies that we need to employ, but also the overall goal. I'm going to talk about this towards the end just to highlight it, but really what the plan or the program requires is a progressive goal for reducing or eliminating fatalities and reducing or eliminating serious injuries. You'll see towards the end of this that the goal that we've hovered around was that 0 fatality goal by 2050 and reducing serious injuries by half in that same time frame. We have a lot of other performance metrics we're going to use for tracking going forward, but those are kind of the two big ones that we essentially want buy-in for from leadership to say, yeah, we think that it's something that we definitely want to support, is that goal of 0 in the near future. And there's a lot of data supporting that, we're on trend for that. We know that there will be difficulties in terms of, reaching 0 or realistic and how we'll approach that. But the strategies within this plan, the programmatic changes that we're talking about, those are the things that are going to get us to those numbers. And we want to show support in those and doing those to get to that number. Speed management is a big aspect of that. The safe system approach is all about the kinetic energy when it comes to crashes. And the biggest part that we can control in that is the speed part. So there's been a lot of efforts to address speed from a site and corridor specific standpoint on this project. We've done quite a few speed limit studies throughout the various partner municipalities. So there will be a resulting recommendation for places where we can shift to more of a either reduce the posted speed or even get it down to 25 miles an hour. There's a lot of that for site specific locations, and then generally for the plan as an overall strategy, addressing speed as it plays into all of the other emphasis areas. We know that speed crashes impact roadway departures. We know that they're a part of our alcohol impairment crashes. Usually when someone is speeding, or someone's doing another unsafe behavior, they're also speeding. So there's a lot of overlap with some of our other key emphasis areas if we can address speed. So as part of speed management within the strategies and actions of the plan, we're pushing for a lot of things to be used, like advisory speed zone signs and a lot of the treatments seen here, raising the intersection, or in local communities where we want those lower speeds, having speed tables, speed humps, the things you would see in a more residential community or somewhere where we want to get that speed, that actual operating speed down to the posted speed. I should also mention that with the speed emphasis area, the speed theme here, we also included that as part of the systemic analysis for this project and for this plan. So there are also kind of a rollout of some of these countermeasures in a systemic matter throughout the full network as well that can be utilized. And same for roadway departures. So we already talked a little bit about it just naturally through that NISDOT call for projects, but roadway departure is a major contributor to the fatalities and serious injuries in the region. 26% of the fatal and serious injury crashes are roadway departures, and we know that a very high percentage of those are taking place on our rural roadways. Again, this was part of our systemic analysis too. So there are a lot of recommendations that support network-wide rollout at specific risk locations for roadway departure. And it's a lot of what you would expect and a lot of what you already talked about: signage, striping, edgeline rumble, those types of things to hopefully address even locations that maybe haven't yet exhibited a roadway departure that might be likely to in the future. So it's giving us that proactive approach that we can kind of feed in to our rural roadway network that might not have gotten that reactive priority through our hotspot network screenings or our concept development road safety audit push. And then intersections. So we know the majority of our crashes occur at intersections. The majority of our fatal and serious injury crashes occur at intersections. Naturally, that's where we have the most opportunities for conflict. We have motor vehicles and other users mixing at these locations. It's where 67% of our bicycle and pedestrian fatalities and serious injuries occur. I don't think that's a huge surprise, but there's also a lot we could be doing there. This also was addressed from a systemic standpoint, but was also a huge focus of the concept development and road safety audit locations that were brought to us and agreed to by the partner jurisdictions as well. So we're seeing spot treatments of these, we're seeing systemic treatments of these. I feel like intersections are going to rise to the top in a lot of our current investigations of our priority locations. It's definitely something we want to focus on going forward. That being said, it overlaps a lot with that bike ped in our vulnerable road user area. So you're going to see as we move into our conversation around those, how intersections could be improved as well. So I won't spend too much time highlighting all of the pedestrian and bicycle related intersection improvements here, so much as there's a lot of things we can do at intersections that would benefit everyone, whether it's retiming the signal or moving to a stop controlled roundabout situation. There's, depending on the type of issue at the intersection, there's a lot of recommendations that we can put forward. I think support for a lot of these was kind of the key strategy within the plan itself, making sure that we're giving all the jurisdictions ample ability to utilize these and implement these. And then complete streets, so supporting that roadways should be designed for all user types and making sure that we're taking context into account when we're designing roadways and understanding the surroundings, so that those various user types can access it accordingly. Have some stats here just generally about the numbers of fatalities and serious injuries and crashes for our bike ped group, which were considered as our vulnerable road users. That also includes roadway workers and those outside of vehicles in work zones. So definitely something else we want to consider addressing with this. But there's a lot we could be doing in the complete streets realm. Really just making sure we're right sizing our roadways, and a lot of the site specific concepts that are being developed now, they're being designed with a complete street mentality. So making sure that we're allocating the right number of width and number of lanes to vehicle traffic as well as the right allocation of that width to things like bicycle infrastructure, sidewalks, crossings, all of that stuff. And making sure where we can, having buffers between those user types, because we know it is a proven approach from the safe system approach side of things to actually, divide those user types as much as possible. If we can give them separate crossings, separate parallel movements, all of that is more likely to reduce and eliminate the opportunity for that conflict. We know that when it comes to a vulnerable road user crash, also that the reason we're using the term vulnerable road user is that they are more vulnerable in a collision with a motor vehicle. In the crashes involving a bicycle or pedestrian, the rate for potential fatal or serious injury was 6 times that of 6 times higher than that of 2 vehicles crashing and having an injury resulting from that. So we know that we need to address for these vulnerable users. We know that more people are choosing to walk and bike, and that those numbers are going to continue to increase. So this is a key area we want to focus on. There was some pedestrian systemic analysis completed as well. So we do have some risk locations based on where we know pedestrian crashes are more likely to occur. But in general, as we're rolling out roadway design and infrastructure treatments, they need to be done with this complete street mentality in mind. And so there's a lot of strategies revolving around this, and the key theme of really supporting this throughout the entire plan. And then here's some general pedestrian and bicycle recommendation improvements that I think you're all very familiar with. Again, those where we can actually separate the movements or physically separate these users from the motor vehicles are better. They're proven to be the top tier and the top way to reduce fatalities and serious injuries. But there's a lot we can be doing even more systemically that's cheaper and easier, at least in the short term, to address these issues as well. Safe road users, again, we're using this general theme to encompass those behaviors that are considered unsafe or more likely to lead to fatal and serious injury. Again, think about distracted driving, impaired driving, and also specific user groups by age. Most of the things that we want to address as part of this are going to require some strategies around enforcement and education. And not just infrastructure improvements, as much as a lot of us deal with infrastructure improvements as part of our daily work. There's a lot we could be doing about educating the general public and giving them kind of the ability to take safety into their own hands as well. And as part of the safe system approach and the safe road users element of that approach, we want to give people that ability. We know it's going to take that comprehensive approach to get rid of fatalities altogether. So giving them that education, giving them that ability to behave more safely and put themselves in safer positions. Just to highlight that kind of age piece as well, part of the reason we wanted to include those younger drivers and older drivers as part of this is that we know when a driver 65 plus gets into a crash, it is more likely that it could result in a fatal or serious injury. And then similarly, we know that drivers under the age of 21, while they have a very low percentage of the overall number of licenses in the region, they do have they have a much higher overrepresented number of fatal or serious injury crashes that they're a part of. So we know that's an area that needs to be focused on. Those educational programs, can be rolled out at schools and at locations where driver licensing testing is taking place. So trying to improve that and address a lot of the issues we're seeing there are key. That education can come in the form of, let's talk about these unsafe behaviors that you should not be exhibiting while you're driving. You should not be on your cell phone while you're driving, but also talking about new and more innovative types of infrastructure. So if there are interchange designs that might be confusing, or knowing how to operate a roundabout for the first time for both of these age categories and the general public driving are very important. So as part of the plan, we've included quite a few educational strategies to address some of this, but also the enforcement side, showing support for that for these other unsafe behaviors as well. Just threw in a piece as well for some of the standards and local codes that can be addressed to help with some of this when it comes to things like site development and zoning, basically helping to make sure that as we're putting in new developments or putting in new things that are going to impact traffic volumes, that safety is being taken into account. And that can be done by looking at the network screening and hotspot areas we've developed, but also understanding where our vulnerable road users are and would be traveling as these developments come in. So making sure that safety is being included as a site plan review is being completed, and making sure that planning and zoning boards understand and provide that safety training as well. So there's some aspects in there for that, and that's really going to help us standardize safety as new development takes place, which is a challenging piece everywhere. So a good one to really try and tackle as part of this. And then lastly, post-crash care. Again, this is where we're getting to how do we make sure that when a crash does occur, that we get people the care they need so it doesn't end up resulting in a fatal or serious injury in that time between crash and care. And that comes with a lot of difficult challenges, making sure one, that the right level of care is accessible and nearby throughout the entire roadway network throughout the entire region. That can be very challenging. But also making sure there's access in terms of the roadway network and places to pull off and administer care, maybe before making their way to a hospital or other location. Those are all challenging but important aspects of kind of getting that full comprehensive approach to safety. So something we're definitely going to have to continue talking through and coordinating on, but trying to improve those times, those response times, and the capacity of those medical services will help improve safety going forward too, and get those remaining fatalities and serious injury numbers down. Before I move on, are there any questions regarding those general themes that our strategies and our recommended improvements are going to fall into? I didn't miss anything in the chat here. Seeing anything? Great. So just the last couple of things here for the last couple of minutes. Going forward, to make sure this plan has teeth, make sure it's set for implementation. We've put in quite a few performance measures. Naturally, coming from the state level, NISDOT's already established their required performance measures, and we're definitely going to include those as part of this. But the number of fatalities, the rate of fatalities per vehicle miles traveled, the total number of serious injuries, and the rate of serious injuries per vehicle miles traveled, and then the overall number of non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries as well. With that, we are also looking into a couple of other important contextual aspects around that. So we're going to look at fatalities and serious injuries and their rate, but break that out by functional class, which we could later break out by context, classifications, ownership, that type of thing if we decide that's needed. But really getting that better understanding of on what types of roadways are we seeing improvements or increases and decreases in our fatality and serious injury rate. Similarly, getting a ratio of those fatalities and serious injuries per the population, specifically in the equity priority areas that were developed as part of this and other planning efforts in the region, and comparing that to the region-wide average overall. So seeing if we have a discrepancy and an overrepresentation going forward, or can address that overrepresentation of fatalities and serious injuries in those equity areas in the future. And this is just to show what that looks like. This will be in the plan itself, showing where that data comes from, what the general targets are for those. As I said before, for fatalities overall, the goal is for it to have 0 by 2050, and for serious injuries is to get a reduction of 50% by 2050. Both of which I think are progressive, but also very feasible, and something that I'm happy to see the plan and the general partners for this plan supporting. We do have these other aspects in here for performance measures with general targets that obviously are impacted by those overall fatality and serious injury goals as well. Are there any questions about the performance measures and tracking this effort going forward? All righty. Well, then I will hand it back over. I just wanted to highlight real quickly that as we are moving forward, I mentioned before the draft plan is in place. We are working on finalizing it with our administrative committee, which is made up of those joint partners, as well as our community advisory council. We're going to wrap up revisions to that plan by the end of the month. And then it will go for online for public review to start August or sometime around mid-August. I imagine we'll give a month or 30 days for that review, and then we'll be able to wrap that up and finalize it. And it will be placed on the website going forward. Sandy, anything I missed with that one?
Nope, you know, the schedule is, we're going to be bringing it to you folks to release for public review in August. So you'll see the actual full document, and then we'll be asking our policy board to adopt it in September.
New concepts, are they out there? I thought I saw something about, are they
The
available?
There
Go
are
ahead,
a couple that are wrapping up. They're in draft form, and they will definitely be available before that final version. And they will be within the plan, either as an appendix or within the body of the plan for those individual concepts.
Sandy. Loosely related, I love loosely related questions. Are there any third-party studies that talk about how these new technology things that I brought up at the last meeting are working in those test areas? Are they reducing crashes? Is there any data on how that's working with these autonomous vehicles that have all the sensors that are trying to, you know, because I'm just saying, if we're looking in 5 years, 10 years, trying to reduce things.
Yeah.
Hopefully something like that will be around,
I-
and they're already existing in other places.
Right, I think that I'm gonna assume the best source would probably be Transportation Research Board research through universities, because there's probably a bazillion different studies going
But
on
there's no
out there.
like government like that said that you like, that comes through the MPO saying, we've seen this and this from having these autonomous vehicles out there.
There may be, you know, certainly here in New York, we don't have, you know,
I
implementation
don't know.
yet, but you know, in these other states, we are, you know, the evidence is being gathered now. You know, we'll be tracking all of that and certainly bringing it to your attention when, you know, the time is right, you know. A lot of this stuff is still in its infancy, coming back to, you know, it takes a few years to gather information about how things are working. But I'm sure there's numerous studies out there already or underway.
Good, all right.
All right, thanks, Corey. We appreciate it.
Yeah, and Sandy, that point around the autonomous vehicles is really important, because I think in previous meetings we talked about that like long-term trend since the 70s for fatalities specifically is showing, you know, a line that's heading for 2050, if not earlier, for zero. And a lot of that has to do with how vehicles have improved, how other aspects of the driving world have improved. So it's not just, you know, safety improvements are very important, but we also understand that hopefully there will be advancements in safer vehicles in that way that are going to help us get to that number. So it's really taking that into account in the background as well, because that's one of the 5 tenets of that safe system approach.
Absolutely.
A really good point.
All
Awesome.
right,
Thank you all so much. Appreciate your time today.
thanks, Corey.
Thank you. Moving right along. In motion.
Yep.
Sandy?
So this should be relatively quick, just a quick update. Where things are at with the emotion plan. So, you know, at our prior meeting, you know, we've talked a lot about the history here, but here where we're at in terms of the schedule, we're working on public input right now on the draft strategies and actions for the plan. We've previously presented those. As I said previously, we'll have a draft document for you to review in August. So your planning committee electronic packet's gonna have some pretty dense documents in there. So I'm just gonna give you that heads up now. We apologize for the pylon, how that happens sometimes. But we are gonna release this, the emotion plan for public review formally in August. We'll have a little open house in a virtual workshop to accompany that, and we'll be looking to adopt this plan in September at our policy board meeting. So the one piece that we haven't talked about yet with anyone outside of our staff and the consultant team are the performance measure section, and how are we going to measure success? So we've talked here a bit about these federally required performance measures. They're tied to safety and the condition of pavement and bridges, asset management, system performance. So, you know, that ties into like congestion management as an example, and how goods are being moved efficiently through the region. So these are sort of the mandated federal measures that we'll be tracking over time to see how our region is performing. But we also wanted to identify what we're calling key performance indicators, or sort of regionally significant measures that we feel comfortable being able to actually follow through on tracking, because the data is available, and it's information that will be relevant to you folks here in the region, to see how we're progressing on meeting the plan's goals. And that's how it's organized. So for each of the 5 plan goals, we'll have a series of these key performance indicators. So for example, for safety, we have, you know, how the Highway Safety Improvement Program funds are assigned to projects, right? So that's an easy one to track off of our tip spending. We can track the number of crashes by county, track the number of tickets issued by county. Obviously, everything that Corey just described in the Vision Zero plan would also be part of this. And we're gonna do the same for each goal topic. So for mobility, similarly, we are using some of the federal funds in our tip to look at how we're spending on roadway maintenance and some other issues. We're gonna try to track the condition data for sidewalks, paved multi-use trails, and bike facilities, which is information we really haven't collected in mass in the past. We're gonna look at how much money we're obligating toward technology projects. Think about and look at how many signals we have with video detection, which I know the state is currently implementing, and maybe there's other technologies that we could track. We could look at the mileage of sidewalk data available to us from municipalities. So just a few of the mobility indicators. Then yep.
V2X.
So vehicle to everything, yes, that is a very technical way of just saying how the vehicle is going to talk to signals. It's the simplest way to put it.
And other cars and.
Right,
Vehicle has something in it that's communicating to.
yeah, to everything, so it's,
There's even, I even heard of pilot vehicles to communicate to a phone app for pedestrians, so that a vehicle will know if a pedestrian's about in the vicinity.
Yeah.
Again, they're looking at everything.
big data, big tech.
It's provided everyone downloads
That
that information on their phone, or, or the
Right.
carrier puts it on the phone
Right.
when you buy it.
Right.
But yeah, there's other technology where video detection picks up the tag. I'll send the alert out as well. There's a bunch of stuff coming.
We've kind of made the point of emphasizing signals in this because there's talk here in our region about doing some pretty robust investment in upgrading our signals and adding new technologies. And we think this is a really huge opportunity area for improving not only congestion management concerns, but dealing with some of the challenges of the multimodal aspects at signals. So there's a lot of opportunity, we think, with technology and signals. In terms of access, we had a number of metrics related to whether it's the share of multimodal use throughout the region, so how many people are actually using transit, walking and biking, etc. The number of cycle trips for CPHP cycle. We can look at through a spatial analysis how many key destinations there are within a half-mile walk of a trail. Maybe there's some other metrics there. We can look at number of STAR trips and eligible customers for those with disabilities. We can look at the miles of sidewalks considered accessible or fully accessible in the region. We're getting more and more data now on the conditions of sidewalks and where we have ADA transition plans in the region. We can also look at the miles of active transportation infrastructure that's been built, We already have a map that kind of attempts to at least catalog all of that, and we can continue to track that over time. You can also look at the number of alternative fuel vehicle chargers or other types of alternative fuel infrastructure that gets installed. Then we can also look at the number of new bus shelters and accessible bus stops and overall, the overall percentage of total stops and stations accessible. So we felt like these were some metrics that we could track over time for access.
That last one, alternative fuel chargers infrastructure, are you seeing in our area or any urban area? Cities setting up parking lots for public charging in neighborhoods or on the road, is that?
We're actually starting a project with the city of Albany to explore just that. They have some NYSERDA funding for, I think, 14 chargers around it correctly. We're partnering with CDRPC on this, but yeah, that's the idea, is we want to see, the city's interested in getting chargers into the residential neighborhoods.
Right.
Particularly those where they don't have off-street parking. And looking at the sort of the issues surrounding that, so there's capacity issues in terms of parking itself, and as Mark talked about earlier, the capacity of the provision of electricity. You know, and all the site selection factors that would go into that, so.
Just kind of keep me in the loop as you go.
Absolutely, sure. So that's okay, for livability, some of the indicators we'll be looking at are. Tip projects that are in compact development or transit oriented areas, we can do that through a spatial analysis. We can look at the number of communities with complete streets policy, something we're already tracking. We can look at the annual average daily freight traffic on interstate routes. We can pull that from traffic volume data that the state collects. We can look at the number of new housing and or apartment units constructed or at least approved. Maybe that's done through permit data that I know CDRPC collects. We can look at transportation projects that are actually on schedule. So that gets us to the project delivery piece of the tip. And then for the resilience, we can look at the range of funds that we obligate for resilience type projects. So whether that's, expanding a culvert or hardening some infrastructure through our TIP process, we can look at the number of weather related transportation closures through some state data that we have access to. We can also look at the number of overall reported incidents by type and by month, again, through some state data. We can look at the cost of delay by month. We can look at funding obligated for Superfund remediation. Maybe that's through some of the Superfund money through EPA. And then we can also look at the Protect program and see, while we haven't had a lot of expenditures in our region on this, but as we do, we can track that as well. So those are just some high level proposals for the metrics in terms of what we'll be looking at. Right now we have our 4th survey open. We'll be doing some farmers markets over this next month. There'll be some additional engagement opportunities. We're going to do some transit station pop-ups. And we'll be doing, as I said earlier, the open house and the virtual public meeting for the plan in August. So that's all I had for you today in terms of the update, but we are getting to the finish line on these big planning studies that we've been talking about for quite some time now. And we'll start moving into implementation in the not too distant future. So if you have any questions, let me know.
Thank you, Sandy. Moving along, TIP administration modifications, Sandfield.
Yeah. Share my screen with the list. Right, take it away, Andrea.
Okay, I don't have much to say. This is
It's
just a
pretty-
monthly update on the administrative modifications that we continue to carry out at the request of the local project sponsors. So this is just a summary of the ones that we've prepared since the last planning committee.
Nothing earth shattering here.
Nothing earth shattering. I will note, though, we are getting almost to that time of year where we have to start thinking about the check-in with all the sponsors on the status of projects as we roll into August and September. So probably at some point in August, we may convene either a tip task force meeting, or we'll just reach out by email to sponsors to kind of talk about where things are at and how we might need to rebalance books September.
So because the draft tip and stip is eventually get frozen for a couple months for the public review and then agency review process. We did make recommendations of basically having very few projects in federal fiscal year 26. Now that, all that means is if you get your PS&E, let us know and we'll move it in, you know, and please do, you know, don't take the foot off the gas because it's parked in an out year. We just, to avoid the annual thing of the unamended performance, we just said, let's just move nearly everything out unless it's a sure thing.
So we're hopeful everything that we parked in this year is a sure thing, is my point.
Yeah, but then the stuff that's in the current year, we need the PS&Es into our office before September 1st, but we have till September 15th, but
yeah,
please don't. Or earlier the better.
So we will probably coordinate with you just on an email to initiate that conversation with the sponsors potentially impacted. And then we'll go from there, but that should be coming soon.
Okay, nothing really to say there. NISDOT project delivery, is that gonna be you, Greg? Is that?
Sure is. I don't have much. We only let one project recently with Water Street, which has been forever delayed by a railroad permit. And
Imagine that.
finally went to letting and came in within 200,000 of our engineer's estimate. So we are currently estimating at the current rate of inflation. I'm not saying prices are going down, we just are getting better at,
Knowing how much they're gonna go up.
yeah, so. And that's it on our project delivery this month.
Yeah.
Slow month.
Okay, thank you. Status of regional transportation planning initiatives. Sandy, that's back to you.
Yep, so we're wrapping up the linkage study in Voorheesville on their complete streets plan. We're also wrapping up the Broadway flood resilient multimodal corridor study, sponsored by Albany County and with some local partners. The Central Avenue project is well underway, it's kind of reaching draft report stage. We also just are about to kick off the Half Moon Clifton Park County Route 109 complete street study. And the Route 7 study in Niskayuna. Just kind of completed its first round of public engagement and is starting to get into concept development. We also will be, and I've said this, we actually just hired, I'll introduce Martin Hull, who just joined us from WSP. He is now our Director of Regional Planning, replacing Jen Saponis. With that hire, I finally have the capacity to start the new linkage project. So we'll be working on Boston Spa and their traffic calming master plan, and also in Saratoga Springs, the West Avenue complete street studies. So we're hoping to kick those off in the very, very near future. We're also finally wrapping up some legacy technical assistance projects in North Greenbush and the city of Rensselaer. Just completed one in the town of Ballston. We're nearing completion on one in the city of Cohoes on the parking study. We're about to start one with Albany County on the broader active transportation program that we're trying to work with them on. I know I mentioned a couple others that we've got feelers out, and we'll be adding to this list by our next meeting. But I think that wraps up the regional updates.
Thank you, Sandy. Regional local planning updates, so going back to you again, or are we?
I think we're good for today. Thank you.
CDRPC, Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, our annual planning and zoning workshop, October 17th, save the date, Hudson Valley Community College. It'll be really fun. We are approaching completion of our comprehensive climate action plan. It's due to the EPA if it still exists by September. And we were also taking a look at housing in the region, and funded through the Transportation Council, trying to paint a picture of the housing and transportation connection. We are doing a couple things. We are surveying the towns in each county or cities with the highest growth in the past decade to find out, how growth has been happening. One of the conclusions that we can draw from the suburban towns that are experiencing large amounts of multifamily, large apartment complexes is that none of them actually have a zoning district that allows large apartment complexes. They're all issued through PUD or PUD components. In addition, we're releasing various reports as we are doing these analyses on housing. Our latest report that we released takes a look at single-family home growth versus missing middle housing. Missing middle housing defined as anything that's not a large apartment building. So duplexes, triplexes, condos, accessory dwelling units. Interesting conclusion there is that they're increasing as a share of development. If a development is proposed as a single-family home development, many that are coming in also have a missing middle housing component, whether it's some multifamily housing in it. It just helps the developers pencil out these kind of developments, given the high cost to construct single-family homes. And also the return on investment for missing middle housing, not only are they more affordable for entry-level housing, they are also appreciating at about double the percentage rate of single-family homes. So that report's on our website. That's all I have.
Thank you. CDTA,
Thank you. CTA is almost wrapped up with our FTA triennial review, which we've been working on for the last couple of weeks. Exit conference for that is scheduled for this week, so fingers crossed, pending that, we should be all set for another 3 years, which is great news. Also on our TDP, the Transit Development Plan update, the adoption of that plan was bumped for what I hope is the last and final time. It's now on the agenda for our board to review in August and adopt in September. So sometime this month, I'd like to meet with Transportation Council staff to go over the final draft and make sure it still aligns with the latest and greatest version of InMotion. So Sandy, Ethan Ward and I will coordinate with you offline about that.
Great, thanks.
Yep, and that's it. Thank you.
nice that. Anything for anybody?
I do a little bit, in the staffing news, it's, obviously, no news that Alex is now joining the South Colony. So for local projects, the new contact is Julia Heller, formerly known as Julia Trivers of Federal Highway. She's in the changing of, career path. She's also decided to get married, so she's now Julia Heller in our office. She's hitting the ground running to meet sponsors and, take on the local liaison role. So then, in other news, Empire State Development has gotten off the ground on a study that was announced a few months ago, or it was an RFP was on the street a few months ago. They have a consultant team in place and they're beginning an economic development study in the city of Albany, which of course overlaps with the Reimagine I-787 work. So our project teams are coordinating. We're gonna attend each other's meetings so that public that shows up and is asking the question that should be asked to the other agency, will all be there to, if they come to DOT and ask an economic question, we can point them over there, and vice versa, ask a transportation question and point them back at us. Just to help reduce the public fatigue of which public meeting do I need to go to this month? So we're coordinating, and of course, coordinating our efforts for what they cook up and how it could impact what we're gonna continue working on. Their study is gonna be done far ahead of any environmental phases of the 787 project, which is actually helpful because the economic parts can be useful for us, so. We're coordinating, so stay tuned when meetings start getting announced.
And this is the part of the 400 million that was from the state budget for Albany, is that the ESD project, or is it a different project?
Yes, as I understand it. ESD was actually before the big announcement of the 400, ESD was already laying the groundwork for this study and. Without speaking for them, it sounds like the results of this study are the best strategy to maximize the 200 million that is not for the state museum.
Right, okay. Thank you.
That's how I understand their mission.
All right, New York State Thruway Authority, thank you. Great. Anybody from the Thruway?
Airport authority?
They're coming to you. But
Oh,
Thruway Authority, nobody?
They were listening at Land so they jumped off.
Are they out?
Yeah.
Okay. Airport Authority,
That was my turn.
yes.
Morning. Everything's with the airport. This year so far, even with everything going on systemically, we've seen record numbers of passengers that continues. While most airports our size are kind of seeing a reduction in capacity, we're seeing an increase of. We were on pace for about 9% this year. I don't know if it's gonna fall, it's gonna continue, but yeah. The construction itself is coming along. We just repaved our primary runway. That's pretty much done. There's a couple punch list items left. The passenger queuing area, so that passenger bridge over between the garage and the check-in area, we expect that by November to be, usable in its capacity, and then, 2026 for the rest of the project, so. You might see some lane switches while that finishes up, but not as frequently. And then, I feel like I'm forgetting something.
That's correct.
Thank you.
You don't have to take your shoes off anymore.
Yeah.
Great,
Getting in and out of the airport with the people that are directing the traffic in a very tight space, drop off and pick up area. It's like they're conducting a symphony. Yeah. And they do it very well. They have a great team doing that, and I'll pass off that to the director. Thank you.
Thank you. Albany Port,
John has left
left
early.
the
Yeah.
building.
Has left.
Local government, anybody? Anything interesting?
Just to
You
keep
wanna
on
share?
your, just to keep on your agenda, the Saratoga County Planning and Zoning Conference scheduled for February 11th. So I'm sure you have that on your calendar.
It's not coinciding with a planning
I know.
committee day.
Okay. We're trying to be planners.
Thank you.
But there will be information going out for our previous speakers that have spoke to get your thoughts on if you're interested in speaking again, or if you have any other speaking ideas that you would like to see at the conference. Please let us know. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, upcoming meetings, events, you're gonna be tabling at the various farmers markets for the study.
Yep.
There's a Human Service Transportation Advisory Committee, August 4th. Planning Committee will be back here August 6th. All right, summertime meetings. And then we have a public meeting in motion, Delaware Library, French.
Yeah, that'll be our tentative date for the open house. Instead of doing it here at the office, we thought we would go out to the community. We're gonna use a Delaware branch of the Albany Public Library System.
Time.
What time?
What time would that be?
It will likely be between 4 and 6 p.m.
Anything else?
I think that is
That
it.
is it. We get a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion.
Like,
A second. Bill? Huh? All those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed, abstain. Thank you.